The champagne was cold in my hand, and I kept telling myself that was why I was trembling. Vale House rose around me like something out of a dream someone else had dreamed, all hammered brass fixtures and walls paneled in pale cedar wood, velvet the color of deep plums spilling from the curtained alcoves, floral arrangements so architectural they looked like sculpture rather than flowers. The lobby atrium soared 3 stories above the reception rooms, and somewhere up there, through a glass ceiling, I could see the last bruised light of an autumn evening pressing down on the city. Everything smelled of cedarwood, white tea, and something expensive I couldn't name. The kind of smell that meant money without trying. I was not supposed to feel out of place. I had spent the last 6 weeks designing the mood board that had helped Brielle prepare her pitch. I had sketched color palettes at my kitchen table at 2 a.m, researched the Vale House brand aesthetic, sourced fabric swatches, printed presentation boards, and rehearsed talking points with her until my voice went rough. I had done all of that because Brielle was my girlfriend and I loved her, and because when Brielle was nervous she became soft and needed me, and being needed felt close enough to being loved that I had stopped examining the difference. The dress I was wearing had cost me more than I should have spent. Midnight blue silk charmeuse that skimmed my shoulders and pooled slightly at the hem. I had found it at a consignment shop on Mercer Street and had it altered, and I had stood in the tailor's tiny studio convincing myself I deserved something beautiful. Brielle had barely glanced at me when I came out of the bathroom that evening. She had been checking her phone, then her teeth in the hallway mirror, then her phone again. "You look fine," she had said. Fine. Not beautiful, not stunning. Fine, the way you say fine about something you stopped seeing. Before I continue, if you enjoyed this story, I share lots of steamy, uncensored stories on my Patreon page, which is linked in the description. Details are in the description and comments. Be careful, it's very, very hot inside. I had held that word, fine, gently in my chest during the car ride to Vale House, the way you hold something fragile that you suspect is already broken and are just waiting for the moment to find out for certain. But I had smiled and reached for her hand, and she had squeezed back briefly, distracted, and I had thought, she is nervous. She has worked so hard for this. Tonight matters for her. I was good at making other people's needs the story and my own feelings the footnote. The event was a quarterly gathering of Vale House investors and hospitality industry leaders. The kind of room where people wore watches that cost more than my annual income and talked about properties like other people talked about acquaintances. Brielle moved through it beautifully. She always did. She had a gift for those rooms. She knew how to wear ambition like an accessory, how to laugh at exactly the right moments, how to make powerful people feel discovered. I trailed after her for a while, fetching drinks, smiling at introductions, and then gradually realized that introducing me had stopped happening. I had become a pleasant irrelevance at her elbow, so I drifted, as I often did at Brielle's events. I found a spot near a curtained archway between the main reception room and the corridor beyond, close enough to a table of canapes that I had something to do with my hands. The champagne was good. The candles on the tables were beeswax and burned with a warm, faintly honeyed smell. I watched Brielle across the room, head tilted back, laughing, and tried to feel proud of her instead of peripheral. The voices from the other side of the curtained archway drifted toward me gradually. I was not eavesdropping. I was simply standing still when the world continued around me, and the velvet was heavy enough that no one beyond it knew I was there. Pulled it together beautifully, though. The mood boards were sophisticated. Vale's going to love it. Brielle always delivers. She has an eye. And then Brielle's voice, warm and performing, slightly lowered the way people lower their voices when they want to be overheard. Honestly, the visual work wasn't mine. I mean, I directed it, obviously, but my girlfriend put it together. She's a stylist, freelance. A pause, and then laughter bubbled through it. She's sweet, a little desperate, honestly. She grew up with nothing and she gets so anxious about being useful. You can't really tell her no when she offers to help because she needs it. She needs to feel needed. The champagne flute tilted in my grip. I caught it with both hands, very carefully. "And the talent is yours intellectually," another voice said, leading her. "The concepts are mine. She executes. She's good at execution." Another pause. "She also covered my deposit last quarter when I was waiting on commission. I keep meaning to pay it back. She never asks." Low laughter, easy and careless. "She wouldn't. She's terrified I'll leave if she makes it difficult. The cold moved from the champagne glass up through my fingers and into my chest and settled there. She knew, she had always known. Not just that I was afraid I had shared that with her in the dark, carefully, the way you share something precious, but that she could use the fear, that my love for her was a resource she was extracting. She had mapped my vulnerability like a property survey, identified the load-bearing walls of my self-worth, and decided they were hers to lean against. I thought about the deposit she mentioned, $430 6 months ago. I had transferred it from savings I'd been building toward a client project fund. She had said she'd forgotten her card. I thought about the dinner last month at a restaurant I hadn't chosen, on a card I hadn't offered but somehow ended up paying. I thought about the mood boards, the research, the presentation materials I had spent 40 hours of my working week creating, categorized in my brain as love, categorized in hers as execution. I should have walked away quietly. I should have found a bathroom and sat with the tiles for a while and let myself feel it in private. But I was wearing my good dress and standing in a room full of light, and I had done enough shrinking in quiet places, and something in me, something I hadn't known was still there, wouldn't move. The curtain shifted, and I found myself standing in the archway. Brielle saw me immediately. The smile on her face flickered, a micro-expression, just a frame, and then resettled. The two colleagues with her were industry people I half recognized from previous events, a man in a charcoal suit and a woman with architectural cheekbones and a champagne flute of her own. "Liora," Brielle said, warm, warning. "I heard you," I said. My voice sounded very far away and very steady, which surprised me because I felt anything but. A silence. The man in the charcoal suit glanced between us with the mild interest of someone watching something inconvenient happen to someone else. "Liora," Brielle began, "you said I execute." I was not shouting. I was standing very still with my champagne flute and my silk dress and the $430 in my chest, solid as a stone. "You said the concepts were yours. This isn't the place. You described me to your colleagues as desperate to be loved, as someone you couldn't refuse because she needs to feel needed." Brielle's jaw tightened. The architectural cheekbones woman studied her champagne. "I think," said a voice behind me, and every person in the small cluster, including me, went very still. The voice was low and precise, not loud, the kind of voice that doesn't need volume because silence moves toward it automatically. I turned. Adrienne Vale was not what I had expected, though I should have known better than to have expectations. I had seen photographs. Everyone who worked adjacent to the Vale House world had seen photographs, but photographs had given me someone polished and remote. All angles. In person she was that, but there was a quality to her presence that photographs couldn't hold. She was tall, in her mid-30s, with dark hair swept back from a face that was beautiful in a severe, deliberate way, like architecture rather than accident. She wore something long and slate-colored, deceptively simple, and she moved like someone for whom every room is already arranged around her. She had clearly been standing at the edge of the corridor for more than a moment, long enough to have heard things. "I think," she said again, looking at Brielle with an expression that was not anger. Anger would have been easier, but rather a kind of crystalline assessment, that we should clarify something before the presentation tomorrow morning. Brielle recovered beautifully. She always did. "Ms. Vale, Adrienne, I was just... the mood boards in your submission packet." Adrienne looked at me. "You created them." It was not a question. The precision of it, the directness, she had looked at me fully, not as a curiosity or a problem, but as a person deserving of a clear address. No one in this room had looked at me like that all evening. "Yes," I said. My voice still held, though I had no idea how. "Show me your hands." The request was strange enough that I complied without thinking, extending my right hand slightly. There was a faint callus on the side of my index finger from the pencil I used for preliminary sketches. There were traces of paint under my thumbnail that I had not entirely removed before tonight, a pale terracotta color from a swatch test. The details of working hands. Adrienne looked at them for one moment, then looked at Brielle. "The pellucid sweet color study," she said. "The one in section 3 of the packet. The suggestion about natural tannin tones and the handwritten note about autumn light at 45-degree angles." She paused. That's not the way someone who directs a project thinks. That's the way someone who stands in a room and feels the light thinks. Miss Bennett, I said. Liora Bennett. Liora Bennett created the visual design components of this presentation, Adrienne said, addressing the room around us without raising her voice. I would like to speak with her about the work, and I would like that conversation to reflect accurate attribution. The silence that followed was the kind that rearranges rooms. Brielle's composure held, but something behind her eyes shifted, not guilt, I noticed even then, but calculation. She was already finding angles. Of course, Brielle said smoothly. Liora and I collaborated on everything. You said executed, I heard myself say. You said I execute. Those were your words. Another silence. Adrienne looked at me, a brief assessing look, and in it I thought I saw something I hadn't expected. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. The look of someone who has also been in a room where their contribution was absorbed and renamed. Miss Bennett, Adrienne said, I would like to offer you a formal consultation regarding a series of design projects I've been developing for the hotel. If you have availability, I'd like to discuss it properly. She produced a card from somewhere, a slim cream-colored card that she held toward me, and her hand was steady as the rest of her. Not tonight. Tonight seems to have had enough in it already. She looked at Brielle one final time, and that look was not warmth and not fury, but something colder and more permanent. Accurate assessment. Brielle, she said, we'll speak in the morning about the presentation. There will be some corrections to the attribution documentation. Then she turned and walked back into the reception room, and the people in her wake parted as if she were a tide. Brielle's hand found my elbow the moment Adrienne was gone. Her grip was firm and her smile was reconstructed, and she steered me toward a quiet alcove with practiced ease. That was embarrassing, she said, low and controlled. What you just did. I stared at her. You walked into a professional conversation and made a scene. You told your colleagues I was desperate to be loved. I was being honest about your patterns, Liora, your anxiety. You know you struggle with. You told them you couldn't refuse me because I need to feel needed. You made my love for you sound like a liability I was inflicting on you. Her eyes filled. She had extraordinary eyes, dark and long-lashed and capable of great warmth, and I had loved them for almost 2 years, and watching them fill. Now I felt the terrible, familiar pull of wanting to comfort her, of taking one step back toward her simply because she was hurt. I've been under so much pressure, she said, voice breaking just enough. This pitch, Adrienne, the expectations, you know what this job does to me. And I handle it badly sometimes. I handle things badly. I say stupid things when I'm stressed, and you know that. I did know that. I had filed so many things under that category. Stupid things when stressed, thoughtless things when tired, careless things when distracted, the running total of what I had forgiven by reclassifying as symptoms rather than patterns. The deposit, I said. A pause. What? You told them I transferred you money and that you keep meaning to pay it back. You've never mentioned paying it back to me in 6 months. Liora, I told you. You didn't. You thanked me and we moved on. And I moved on because I didn't want you to feel guilty. Because I thought that was what love was. Not making someone feel guilty. This is... She exhaled sharply. This is exactly what I mean. You make everything so heavy. You're doing it right now, standing there with that look on your face, making everything. I designed your presentation. My voice was still level. I spent 40 hours on it while you went to a spa weekend with Petra and Delphine. I designed it and you told people it was yours. I told them I directed it. You told them I execute. The word tasted like paper. Like I'm a printer. Like I'm a piece of equipment you own. Liora. Don't, said a voice. We both turned. Adrienne had reappeared at the edge of the alcove, not dramatically, not intruding exactly, but present. A wineglass in one hand, her posture easy. She had clearly redirected her route for a reason. She's not going to apologize her way back into something that is quietly consuming her, Adrienne said. Not unkindly, not harshly, simply with the directness of someone reading a situation accurately. And you're not going to help her do that. The last part was aimed at Brielle. Brielle's eyes narrowed. This is a private conversation. You had your private conversation on the other side of a velvet curtain in a public room. I heard most of it. Adrienne looked at me. Go get your coat, Miss Bennett. You don't need to stay for the rest of this evening. She's my girlfriend, Brielle said. She's a talented designer who has been subsidizing your career, your apartment deposits, and apparently your image, Adrienne said, and she doesn't owe you a single additional moment of her attention. She looked at Brielle steadily. I know what you did with the presentation documentation. We'll address that tomorrow. Tonight is over. I walked away. I walked through the beautiful room with its expensive flowers and its honey-scented candles, and I retrieved my coat from the cloakroom, and I stood on the marble steps outside Vale House in the October air, and then I sat down on the top step because my legs had decided they were done. The city moved in front of me, indifferent and ordinary. Taxis, a couple walking a dog, distant sirens. Noah's number was already ringing before I fully decided to call. I'm at a gallery thing. Hang on. Liora, what happened? You sound like a sheet of paper. Brielle, I started, and then couldn't finish the sentence, so I sat there on the marble steps with my phone pressed to my face. I'm coming, Noah said immediately. Stay there. Don't go back inside, don't talk to Brielle, just stay on the steps. I'm coming. I had been telling Noah about Brielle for almost 2 years, editing as I went, softening the parts that felt disloyal, framing the difficult moments as misunderstandings, justifying the financial things as partnership rather than imbalance. Noah had listened with the careful patience of someone who loves you and knows you're not ready to hear what they actually think. She had said periodically gentle things. Do you feel like yourself when you're with her? And does she ask about your work? And once, very quietly, Liora, love isn't supposed to cost this much. I had filed those things under Noah being protective, under single-person skepticism about relationships, under love requiring sacrifice. Sitting on the steps in the cold, I thought, she was right. She has always been right. And Brielle knew she could depend on me not to see it. The door behind me opened and footsteps paused on the step above mine. I looked up. Adrienne Vale was standing with her coat over her arm and her card case in her hand, and she looked at me sitting on the step in my midnight blue dress, and she did not look at all surprised. I won't ask if you're all right, she said. You obviously aren't. Very perceptive. Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. Do you have somewhere to go tonight that isn't your shared address with Brielle Caro? I opened my mouth to say yes and then realized I did not actually have a clear answer to that. My apartment was my apartment, my name on the lease, but Brielle had a key, had been staying there 4 nights a week for the past year, had accumulated possessions there, and the thought of going home and waiting for her to come back was physically impossible. My friend is coming, I said. Good. Adrienne paused. The hotel has a suite that hasn't been assigned tonight, a working suite we keep available. It's not unusual for me to offer it to someone who needs to be out of a situation. She said it without ceremony. The offer is practical, no obligation, quiet, private, clean. Your friend is welcome too. I looked at her for a moment. She looked back and her face was composed and steady and gave nothing away, but there was nothing predatory in it. There was something that looked, faintly and strangely, like the look of someone who has been precisely where you are and knows that what you need is not dramatics, but a door. Why? I asked. Because Brielle Caro has been exaggerating her creative contributions to my staff for the better part of a year, she said, and you've been funding it without knowing you were doing so, and because I saw your work and it is genuinely good, and because... A pause. Fractional. You're sitting on marble steps in October in silk charmeuse and clearly won't ask for anything, which means someone has to offer. I looked at the city for a moment, then I said, Thank you. Noah arrived 20 minutes later, breathless and wearing a paint-stained jacket over her gallery dress, took one look at my face, said, I knew it, and held me for a long moment on the steps. When I explained the suite, she looked skeptical, and I told her about Adrienne's intervention, and her skepticism became something more thoughtful. Ruthless boss of your cheating girlfriend offered you a hotel suite, she said carefully. Former girlfriend, I said, realizing as I said it that I hadn't made it formal yet, but I had. In the alcove in the marble foyer of my chest, I had already made it final. Former girlfriend, Noah accepted. Okay, and Ruthless boss did this because she heard Brielle say I was desperate to be loved. A silence. Right, Noah said softly, and her voice was very different from her usual briskness, stripped down to just care. Okay, we're going in. The suite was on the 4th floor, reached by an elevator with interior walls of pale ash wood and a floor of dark, polished stone. It was called the Pellucid Suite, I noticed from the small brass plaque on the door, and then remembered that was the name from the presentation I had designed. I stepped inside. It was beautiful in a spare, intelligent way that I recognized as intention rather than decoration. The bed linens were the color of winter light, the windows looked over the city, the glass beaded with October rain. There was a writing desk with a reading lamp that cast a warm amber circle, a sitting area with low chairs in a deep persimmon wool, and a bathroom visible through an open door with a tub like a stone basin. A knock at the door 20 minutes later. Noah opened it. Adrienne stood in the corridor with a tray, a pot of tea, 2 cups, a plate of things arranged with more care than a room service order, olives, soft cheese, bread, figs, a small square of chocolate. I told the kitchen to put something together, she said. Not apologetic, not performative, just practical. She set the tray on the desk. Then she looked at me sitting in the persimmon chair still in my coat and dress, and she crossed to me, and she crouched down slightly, an extraordinary thing to watch, this composed, commanding woman lowering herself to eye level, and she said, "May I?" She was looking at my feet. I was wearing heels I had been standing in for 4 hours. I nodded, not entirely sure what I was agreeing to. She removed both shoes with quiet, efficient hands. She didn't make it a moment. She set them aside and stood back up. The robe is behind the bathroom door. The tea is better when it's still hot. Then she moved to stand by the window, looking out at the rain on the glass, giving me the room. I started crying somewhere between the shoes and the robe, not dramatically, not the racking grief kind of crying, but the quieter, more corrosive kind, where your face just becomes wet and you aren't entirely sure when it started. Noah put her arms around me. Adrienne stayed at the window. She didn't leave and she didn't insert herself. She just remained, like a lighthouse, not warm and close, but present and clear. After a while I had tea and cheese and bread, and I told Noah the full story, the real version, not the edited one, with Adrienne standing there, and something about her presence made it easier to tell the truth. Because she already knew the shape of it. Because she had seen it from the other side of a velvet curtain and hadn't looked at me with pity, but with something more useful. Brielle texted 12 times that night. I read none of them. Noah fell asleep in the chair around 1 in the morning. Adrienne had excused herself hours earlier, had said goodnight with the same undemonstrative efficiency with which she'd done everything, and left a number on the desk, not a personal one but a hotel extension, with the words written beside it, "In case you need anything." I sat by the window and watched the rain on the city and tried to understand what I was feeling. Grief, yes, but underneath it, something that frightened me more because it felt almost like relief. The formal offer came 3 days later. I had gone home, had the conversation with Brielle that I will not detail at length, because some things deserve to stay private, even the ones that are messy and painful and involve someone crying in a way that is designed to unhinge you. Brielle cried. She also said I was making her look unprofessional, that I had humiliated her in front of her boss, that I needed to be more secure. She said love shouldn't be transactional, and then, in the same breath, reminded me that she'd made introductions for me at 3 industry events. She said I was too sensitive and also that I was cruel. She said she loved me and that she didn't recognize me anymore, and that I was being impossible and that she was sorry. She was so sorry. She had just been so stressed. I let her finish. Then I said, "I know you believe most of what you're saying. That's what makes it so hard." And I asked her to return my key. She left it on the kitchen counter, not the dining table. The kitchen counter, which was petty in a way that felt deliberately chosen. Noah brought wine that night, and we sat on my studio floor surrounded by the fabric swatches and sample boards of my actual life's work, and she said, "You know, I've been waiting 2 years to say I told you so, and I'm not going to say it because you look like someone walked through you." "Say it," I said. "I told you so." She clinked her glass to mine. Now, what did the terrifying hotel woman say to you? I showed her the card with the formal consultation offer. Noah turned it over in her fingers. You're afraid it's pity? Of course it's pity. She watched me fall apart on a marble step and then fed me figs. Or, Noah said, she saw your work on those boards and she is a ruthless businesswoman who knows talent when she sees it and also, bonus, has a reason to be personally motivated to take Brielle down a few pegs. That's not a great foundation. It's a starting point. Noah set the card down on a swatch of burnt sienna linen. Liora. You have spent 2 years pouring yourself into someone who called you an execution tool at a networking event. You are allowed to take a meeting. I took the meeting. Adrienne's office on the 5th floor of Vale House was the most honest room I had been in years. Books that had actually been read, their spines broken at angles that suggested particular chapters rather than decorative arrangements, a drawing board in the corner with something half-sketched on it, coffee that was genuinely good and already made when I arrived, not staged. Windows that looked over the hotel's internal courtyard, where a garden existed in a state of considered neglect, autumn leaves banked against the stone planters, in arrangements that almost looked intentional. She sat across from me with a contract folder and laid it on the desk between us and looked at me. This is not pity, she said before I could say anything. I don't hire people out of pity. Pity is inefficient. It produces gratitude instead of quality work, and gratitude makes people complacent and resentful in equal measure. She opened the folder. I've been planning to redesign 4 spaces in this hotel for 18 months. I've interviewed 6 design firms. None of them understood what I was looking for. Looking at the work in Brielle's pitch packet, I believe you might understand it. What were you looking for? Rooms that feel like a person thought about them, not rooms that perform having been thought about. She slid a page toward me, photographs of the 4 spaces. The pellucid suite you slept in, the rooftop lounge which currently feels like a hotel bar trying to be a nightclub, the winter garden which is structurally extraordinary and emotionally dead, and the Pemberton ballroom on the 3rd floor which no one has used in 4 years because it feels like grief. I picked up the photographs. I looked at the winter garden, arched glass ceiling, iron tracery, stone floor, beautiful bones and nothing living in it. I looked at the Pemberton ballroom, a vast room with gorgeous plasterwork and curtains the color of old bruises and lighting that made everything look slightly funereal. I said, the ballroom needs light before it needs anything else. The curtains are killing it, and the lighting fixtures are too high and too cold. It needs warmth at human height. Adrienne was watching me with an expression I was starting to recognize, very still, very focused, the way someone looks when they stop performing attention and begin actually paying it. And the winter garden? She asked. It needs something alive that doesn't try too hard, not fussy plantings, something that wants to be there, and the floor is the wrong color, too gray, too institutional. It needs a warmer stone, something that holds light rather than deflecting it. A pause. Would you like to walk through the rooms? We walked through the rooms. I had a sketchbook in my bag. I always had a sketchbook, and I made notes as we went, quick preliminary sketches, dimensions I guessed correctly within small margins that seemed to register with Adrienne. She didn't hover. She walked slightly behind me and let me look, and when I made observations she responded to them precisely rather than enthusiastically, which was better. Enthusiasm from a client is flattering. Precision is useful. We were standing in the Pemberton ballroom in the dust and the dim, and I had my sketchbook open and I was drawing the proportion of the windows relative to the ceiling when I said, without planning to, I haven't had a client in 4 months. A silence. Brielle, Adrienne said, I turned down 2 projects in September because she said she needed me available for hers. I kept sketching. I did it without examining whether I should. You thought it was love, Adrienne said. Not a judgment, a statement. I thought a lot of things were love. I looked up from the sketch, covering the deposit, designing the presentation, turning down the clients. I looked at the dusty ballroom light, making myself smaller and calling it partnership. Adrienne was quiet for a moment, and when I looked at her, she was looking at the plasterwork on the ceiling, the intricate Georgian design, 2 centuries old, absolutely extraordinary and completely invisible under the wrong light. I know something about rooms that are beautiful and badly lit, she said, and it was offered carefully without flourish, the way people say things that mean more than they're revealing. I didn't push it. I went back to sketching. She signed me to the contract that afternoon. The work began the following week, and it was, I will say honestly, the most natural professional experience of my life. Adrienne was exacting without being punishing. She had a precise and educated aesthetic sensibility that she was willing to subordinate when I made a strong enough case. Not easily, but willing. Our design meetings often ran long, not because they meandered, but because they found things. She asked questions about technique and material that were genuinely curious rather than performative. She had spent time on the internet looking at my previous portfolio work before our first proper meeting, and she referred to specific projects, not as small talk, but because she had actually thought about them. She also noticed things I did not intend to reveal. "You've apologized 4 times in this meeting," she said once, mid-October, in the winter garden where I was supervising a sample installation of the new flooring. "For your opinion. You don't need to apologize for your opinions." I stopped. I had not counted the apologies. "It's a habit," I said. "I know what kind of habit it is." She looked at the floor sample, a warm, honey-toned travertine, and then at me. "You don't need to earn the right to have ideas in this room. You were hired because you have them." Another time, early November, she found me eating nothing at my desk in the design office she'd allocated me, a small room adjacent to the events department with windows that looked onto the courtyard. I had a coffee and a pen and 4 samples spread across the desk, and nothing else. "When did you last eat a real meal?" she asked from the doorway. "I had something this morning," I said, which was half true. I had eaten standing up at my kitchen counter while checking emails. "That wasn't a real meal," she said. "That was something you told yourself counted." She set a paper bag on the corner of my desk. She had apparently had the kitchen make a lunch I had not ordered. She didn't make a production of it. She looked at the samples on my desk and said, "The drapery samples look better against the stone than I expected. You were right about the weight." She was like that. Practical tenderness wrapped in professional language. She fed me and told me I was right about the weight. I began to look forward to our days. Then I began to look forward to our evenings because they started having evenings. Late conversations in the empty ballroom or the half-finished rooftop lounge as work wound down, talking about things that weren't the project. She had grown up in a small city in the north of England. She had built Vale House from a single failing hotel she'd bought at 26. She had an apartment in this building but rarely felt at home in it. She read constantly, mostly nonfiction, mostly about systems and structures. She had a dry, extremely subtle humor that I might have missed if I hadn't been paying attention. She was also, I began to see clearly, lonely in a way that had calcified into self-sufficiency. She had made herself into something excellent and impervious, and the impervious part was very convincing, so convincing that I think most people had stopped looking for the parts it was protecting. But I was a person who made rooms feel like something, and I was very used to looking at beautiful things and asking what they were holding back. I made the mistake, or perhaps not a mistake, perhaps the exact right thing, of asking her directly one evening in late November when we were standing in the winter garden looking at the new plantings we'd chosen. A thicket of dark olive trees in terracotta urns, underplanted with artemisia and against the iron tracery. Climbing roses, still bare, their canes traced against the glass ceiling. "Were you ever with someone who understood all of this?" I asked, gesturing vaguely at the hotel, at her, at the architecture of her life. A long pause. "Someone who was very good at appearing to understand it," she said. "What happened?" She understood that being connected to it, to me, had value. A pause. She was less interested in the thing itself than in what it represented. When I understood that, I became difficult to be with. She looked at the bare rose canes. I did not, at the time, handle it with any grace. "What did you do?" "I became worse," she said simply. "I built more. I made Vale House into something that required all of me, so that there was nothing left to offer anyone the opportunity to assess and use." She looked at me. I became, as Brielle Caro's description had it, ruthless. The air in the winter garden was cool and smelled of damp earth from the new plantings and something green and growing. I looked at her, this composed, formidable woman standing in the half-finished room we had been making together, and felt something I had been carefully not naming for weeks sit up and demand to be looked at. "You're not ruthless," I said. "You're very precisely kind, and you've hidden it inside ruthlessness so people don't have access to it." She looked at me for a long moment. "That's a generous reading." "It's an accurate one," I said. "I look at rooms for a living. I know what's structural and what's decorative." The silence that followed was the kind that isn't empty. Then her phone rang and she answered it, and the moment passed, and I went home to my studio apartment and sat with my sketchbook and thought about the bones of things. I did not do anything about what I was feeling. I was not ready to do anything about it, and I knew it, and for the first time in a long time, I trusted myself to know something about my own readiness. Brielle had barely been gone 6 weeks. The heartbreak of it, not even the loss of Brielle specifically, but the loss of the story I had told myself, the revision of 2 years into something I had to look at honestly, that was still raw. I was still finding the edges of it in quiet moments, pressing them gently and finding them sore. But I watched Adrienne. I watched the way she treated the people who worked for her, demanding but not cruel, honest rather than flattering, fiercely protective of the junior staff, in ways she clearly didn't intend to be visible. I watched the way she looked at the hotel, with love and also with the slight sadness of someone who built a home and forgot to move into it. I watched her noticing me, trying not to, noticing me anyway. And I thought, when I am ready, I will know. The argument happened in early December in my design office over a materials budget that I had been quietly underspending to stay within what felt like reasonable territory for a guest in someone else's project. "You've allocated 40% less than the approved ceiling for the ballroom textiles," Adrienne said, with the tone of someone pointing out an error in an accounts ledger. "The materials I've chosen will achieve the same outcome for less," I said. "I approved the higher budget because the higher quality materials will last longer and look better. Choosing substandard materials to spend less isn't fiscally responsible over time. It's false economy. I'm not choosing substandard. The substitutions you've made are adequate," she said. "Your original specifications were better." I put my pen down. "Why does it bother you that I'm spending less?" "Because you're not making an aesthetic decision. You're making a financial anxiety decision and calling it an aesthetic one." Something in that precise and accurate statement hit a place that was still bruised. "Don't do that," I said. "Explain?" "Diagnose me." My voice was sharper than I intended, and I didn't pull it back. "I know you can see what's happening. I know that's how your brain works. But I'm working very hard to make good decisions within an appropriate scope, and I need you to let me do that without—" I stopped, exhaled. "Without making me feel like a project." The silence that followed was different from the winter garden kind. This one had weather in it. "I'm not trying to make you feel like a project," Adrienne said. "Then what are you trying to do?" A longer pause. Her composure cracked slightly, not dramatically, not a shatter, just a hairline, a fraction of something unguarded in her eyes. "I only know how to solve things," she said. "It's the only tool I have for caring about something. I see a problem and I fix it because—" She stopped, restarted. "Because I don't know how to simply stay. I never learned how to stay without doing something, and when I care about what I'm staying for—" She stopped again. The admission was clearly uncomfortable. "I become intrusive." The room changed. "I'm afraid," I said. And it came out more plainly than I intended, like a curtain pulled back. "I'm afraid that if I stop being useful to anyone, they'll reassess whether I'm worth keeping around. Brielle said I was too sensitive. She said I needed to feel needed, and she wasn't entirely wrong about the second part. I have been making myself indispensable to everyone because I have been afraid that basic, just being myself, is not enough." A pause. "She was entirely wrong," Adrienne said quietly. "She was accurately observing a wound she helped create, and she called it a character flaw. That's not insight. That's cruelty dressed in analysis." I looked at her. She looked back. "You are enough," she said. "Not useful enough. Enough." The directness of it, the plainness, went through me like a key turning. "And I'm sorry," she added, "for the intrusion. I'll stop solving." "You can still solve," I said. "Just ask first." The hairline crack at the corner of her mouth became something that was unmistakably a small, real smile. We reordered the original material specifications the following morning. The attraction had been a slow tide, not dramatic, not sudden, but consistent, rising incrementally over weeks of long evenings and shared lunches and design arguments, and the specific intimacy of standing in half-finished rooms together making decisions about how they should feel. There was a moment in mid-December in the Pemberton Ballroom, which by then had new curtains the color of warm amber and a restored crystal chandelier lowered to a height that made it feel like it belonged to the room rather than hovering over it, when we were standing in the center of it, testing the lighting, and the chandelier came on for the first time at full effect, and I gasped, actually gasped, and turned to see if she was seeing what I was seeing, and she was. She was already looking at me. The look lasted only a moment. She looked back at the chandelier, but I felt it everywhere. I knew she felt it too. She was careful, extraordinarily careful, about not acting on it. Not because she was indifferent, because she was principled in a way that ran deep and quiet. She knew the context. Brielle was her employee, however, temporarily. I had been through something genuinely damaging. She had a position of relative power over my professional circumstances. She was not willing to make herself a question mark in my healing. I respected it enormously. It also drove me slightly out of my mind. Brielle came back in mid-December like a weather event. I had known distantly that she was still employed by Adrienne in some capacity pending review. I had not known she would decide that Adrienne's professional interest in my work was evidence of exploitation, or that she would say so to the several people in the hospitality circuit who had mutual knowledge of us both. The rumors reached me through Noah first, as rumors usually did, Noah being an efficient and early warning system for social ugliness. The story Brielle was circulating was that I had manipulated a vulnerable situation to insert myself into a lucrative contract, that my relationship with Adrienne was less professional than advertised, and that the original pitchwork had been genuinely collaborative rather than primarily mine. It was surgical. It used just enough proximity to truth to be credible. We had been close, the timing was suggestive, the arrangement was unconventional, and it targeted the exact two things I was most afraid of: my financial motivations and my integrity. I heard it at a small industry event Noah had dragged me to in January from someone who clearly thought I already knew. I stood very still while this person told me the version they had heard, and I thanked them for telling me directly, and then I found a quiet corner and called Noah, who was already there and already moving toward me. "She's trying to take back the narrative," Noah said, not unkindly, holding both my hands. "She's trying to take back her access," I said, because I understood now that that was what it was. Not jealousy of anything genuine. Brielle didn't love me and hadn't for a long time. She was losing the resource of me, the talent, the money, the labor, the quiet devotion, and she was burning the bridge behind her so that no one else could cross it. "What are you going to do?" I thought about running. I thought about the version of myself who 6 months ago would have shrunk from this and apologized and tried to make it easier for everyone and ended up smaller. I thought about Adrienne standing by the window of a hotel suite while I cried, giving me the room. I thought about the Pemberton Ballroom chandelier and the winter garden roses and design arguments and the way Adrienne had said, "You are enough." "There's an event at Vale House next week," I said. "The winter design preview. My work is going to be showcased." I paused. "I'm going to be there." Vale House's winter design preview was the kind of event the hotel threw to demonstrate its own character to the people whose opinion of it mattered: press, investors, returning members, select industry figures. The redesigned spaces were to be unveiled. My name was in the event materials as the lead designer. Adrienne had insisted on that. Brielle was there. I saw her across the Pemberton Ballroom in the first 10 minutes, standing with Petra and Delphine and 2 other people I recognized from the night of the original event. She saw me see her. She didn't look away. The room was extraordinary. I am allowed to say that because I made it and I know what it cost and I know what it earned. The amber curtains moved in the warm air from the event. The chandelier cast the light I had argued for. The walls were the color I had chosen, pale gold, barely perceptible, like the inside of a seashell, and the floor had been refinished to draw out the original blonde oak beneath the dark varnish. People moved through it with their faces slightly open, the way people look when a room gives them permission to feel something. I was standing near the entrance when I felt the attention shift before I saw it. Brielle had positioned herself near a cluster of people that included 2 press contacts and was saying something with the animated, confiding energy of someone delivering a story they've practiced. I caught words: arrangement, unusual, relationship with the management. I crossed the room. I walked directly to the cluster. Brielle saw me coming, and her eyes did the micro-expression, the flicker, and then resettled into smooth, social calm. "Liora," she said. Warm, warning. "I heard what you've been saying," I said. I kept my voice even, not shouting. I wasn't going to shout. I want to address it directly. The people around us, press, industry contacts, one investor I recognized from the original event, rearranged slightly toward the conversation. Brielle's jaw tightened. "This really isn't the time." "The work in this room is mine," I said. "The Pemberton Ballroom, the Winter Garden, the rooftop lounge, the Pellucid Suite. I can provide documentation, initial sketches dated before I signed the Vale House contract, material sourcing records, approval correspondence between myself and Adrienne Vale. The work is attributable, and I can attribute it." A silence. "The presentation you gave Adrienne Vale last October was based on design work I did," I continued. "I did it because I loved you, and I thought love was demonstrated through usefulness. I was wrong about that. Love is not a service arrangement. But my being wrong about what love looked like doesn't change the fact that the work was mine." Brielle said, "You're making things up to seem—" "I'm not finished," I said quietly. She stopped. "You told people I was desperate to be loved. You weren't wrong exactly, but you used that information as a tool to keep me from understanding what was happening. That was unkind. That was more than unkind." I looked at her steadily. "I'm not angry at you anymore. I'm sad about what I let happen, and I'm learning from it, and I'm done apologizing for the clarity." A very clean silence in the room around us. Then Adrienne's voice from behind me. "Liora Bennett has been the lead designer of this renovation project. Her work is documented, original, and exceptional. Vale House will be acknowledging that formally in tonight's materials and in all subsequent press coverage of these spaces." She was not rescuing me. She had waited. She had stood back and let me speak, and now she was simply confirming what I had said, the way you confirm something that is already a fact rather than a position. Brielle looked between us. Her social armor was still in place, but behind it I could see the calculation running and not finding a play. She was losing the room not because anyone hated her, but because cruelty, when it becomes visible enough and specific enough, stops being navigable. "I think," Petra said, with the finely calibrated instinct of someone whose social world has just recalibrated around her, "we should look at the ballroom." The cluster dispersed. Brielle eventually moved with it. She didn't look at me again. I stood in the entrance to the ballroom for a moment and then exhaled, slowly and fully, the kind of exhale that empties something more than air. Adrienne was still behind me. "That was—" she started. "I know," I said. "No, I was going to say—" A pause. "That was the bravest thing I've seen someone do in a social situation in a considerable number of years, and I've seen a lot of social situations." I turned to look at her. She was standing very close, closer than our usual professional proximity. We had, I realized, been gravitating toward a closeness over the past months that we'd been politely pretending not to notice. Her face in the ballroom's amber light was not its default composed mask. It was something else, something I had seen in brief and carefully rationed glimpses during late evenings and design arguments and the Winter Garden and the moment with the chandelier. "Adrienne," I said. "I know," she said. "I know what I said. About time. About your heartbreak. About the power imbalance." She was very still. "All of those things are still true. Some of them are less urgent than they were," I said. "When did they become less urgent?" "When I understood the difference between what I felt for Brielle and what I feel for you." I looked at her directly. "What I felt for Brielle was a compulsion to earn my place. What I feel for you," I paused, finding the words, "is something I want to offer freely, something I want to choose every day. That's a different thing." The room around us had receded to something distant and atmospheric. Voices, the chandeliers, warm geometry, the smell of beeswax and winter garden flowers from the arrangements throughout. Adrienne said, very quietly, "I'm afraid." "I know. I am very good at building beautiful things that don't let anyone in. I know that too. And you want to come in," I said, "if you'll let me, not to fix it, not to be useful to it, just..." I looked at the room around us, the room we had made together. "To be in it with you." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't know how to do this gently." "You brought me tea and figs and sat by the window while I cried," I said. "You're better at it than you think." And then, finally, after all the long evenings and the careful restraint and the months of a feeling we had been carrying separately, she closed the small remaining distance between us, and her hand came up to the side of my face, and she kissed me. It was not tentative, but it was also not overwhelming. It was exactly as precise and genuine as she was in everything, deliberate, unhurried, certain. She kissed me like she had thought about it for a long time and was not going to squander the fact. My hands found the lapels of her jacket and I held on, and she made a small sound against my lips, and I understood. This is what she sounds like when she stops performing in vulnerability. When we separated, she kept her hand against my cheek for a moment. "I meant what I said about time," she said. "I want you to be sure." "I've been sure since the winter garden," I said. "Since the olive trees." Something in her face did something extraordinary. The fortress wall lowered, not fell, not crumbled, but was deliberately and consciously lowered, the way you lower your own defenses when you decide to trust. "Then I need to be sure," she said, "about myself, about not making you someone who has to manage my defenses." "You're already not that," I said. "But take the time, take whatever you need." She nodded. "Come have dinner with me, not as a work meeting." A fractional pause. "Not as anything except something we choose." "Yes," I said. We stepped out of the Pemberton ballroom and into the warmth of Vale House, and the winter design preview was happening around us in all its beautiful hard-won light, and Noah was somewhere across the room and would find me later with her best-knowing face, and Brielle Caro had left, and the chandelier burned gold above the room I had built, and I was not afraid. Dinner was not romantic in the conventional sense. It was long and candlelit, and we talked, really talked, past midnight in a corner of the hotel's private dining room that Adrienne had reserved without fanfare. She told me about the woman she had loved in her late 20s, Cecily, who had appeared in her life when Vale House was still a renovation dream and had seemed so aligned with everything Adrienne believed, and had then used that alignment like a key to access and extract. "She took 2 years and a significant portion of my trust," Adrienne said without self-pity. "I built the rest of the hotel afterward, like a coping strategy with a lobby." I told her about the version of myself that had existed before Brielle, not better exactly, but differently lit, more naive in some ways, less worn down in others, someone who had wanted love so badly that she had kept trying to purchase it with usefulness. "You never needed to purchase it," Adrienne said. "I know that now. You knew it before. Someone convinced you otherwise." I thought about that. "Multiple someones," I said, "beginning further back than Brielle." She looked at me across the candlelight. "How do you feel right now?" "Like someone who has been holding their breath for a very long time," I said, "and has recently been given permission to breathe." She reached across the table and took my hand, palm to palm, and held it. We did not rush what came next. We took care. Adrienne was as deliberate with the pace of our intimacy as she was with everything. Steady, intentional, never pushing forward and never pulling away, always checking, "Is this what you want?" And I found that I loved her for the checking, because the checking meant she cared more about getting it right than about getting there, and that was new. There was an evening in late January when I stayed late in the winter garden finishing the final planting notes, and she came down from her office and found me cross-legged on the floor among terracotta pots and artemisia cuttings, hair falling forward, charcoal on my hands, completely absorbed. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and I looked up and found her watching me with an expression I had never seen on her before, unguarded and warm and almost wondering, like someone looking at something they are still adjusting to finding beautiful. "What?" I said. "Nothing," she said, Come upstairs when you're done. I made dinner." Adrienne Vale made dinner. In her apartment in the hotel, the apartment she had told me she didn't feel at home in, there was food she had prepared, and wine, and 2 of everything set on the table like an intention, like a home beginning. I said, "You said you don't know how to simply stay." "I'm learning," she said. The project completed in February. All 4 spaces, the Pellucid Suite, the Winter Garden, the Rooftop Lounge, the Pemberton Ballroom, were finished and formally photographed and published in 2 design journals, and my name was on all of them, and the commissions that came from it were mine, negotiated by me on terms I had set. I signed a lease on a proper studio space on Crane Street with a north-facing window. I paid off what remained of the debt Brielle had contributed to through a year of unpaid returns, and the day I made the final transfer I sat at my desk in the new studio for a long time, feeling something I eventually identified as the particular lightness of a weight being set down rather than carried. Noah came to see the studio and walked around it, touching things, and said, "You look different." "I feel different." "Better?" I thought about it. "Complete," I said. "I feel like the version of myself who stopped performing usefulness and just is." "And the terrifying hotel woman?" "She made me dinner," I said. "She's learning to rest." Noah pressed her lips together against a smile. "I'm still not going to say it again." "You can say it again." "I'm choosing not to," she said, "because you seem happy and I want to be generous about it." She looked around the studio. "It's a good room." "I chose all of it." "I know," she said. "That's what makes it good." 6 months after the winter design preview, which is to say early June, the city beginning its reluctant conversion to warmth and green, Vale House hosted its annual summer gala, the largest member event of the year. It was, by any measure, the event equivalent of the night I had stood on marble steps in October in my second-hand silk dress, not knowing if I was about to lose everything or find something true. Adrienne and I arrived together. Not because I was her +1, not because I was being showcased or managed or strategically positioned. I arrived because she had asked me, and because I wanted to be there, and because we were together in the open and unhurried way of people who have chosen each other with full information. I wore something new. Not expensive in the desperate, self-justifying way of the midnight blue dress 6 months ago, but chosen because I liked it. A deep rose silk with a scooped back, simple and good. I had bought it without consulting anyone. The Pemberton Ballroom was dressed for summer. White flowers, the chandelier with gauze shades that diffused its light into something golden and soft. The winter garden beyond it was in full leaf now, the olive trees established in their terracotta urns, the roses climbing the iron tracery in swags of pale cream bloom. The rooftop lounge above us was candle-lit and open to the summer night. I had made all of it. I was standing in rooms I had understood and made beautiful, and I was not peripheral. Adrienne moved through the room beside me the way she moved through all rooms, like the tide, but tonight she kept a hand at the small of my back at moments, or leaned to say something quiet in my ear, or caught my eye across the room with that particular look that was still rare and still precious and still felt like being handed something that cost her something to give. A journalist who had covered the redesign came to find me and asked about the winter garden, and I talked about it directly and with genuine love, and I noticed halfway through the conversation that Adrienne had paused nearby and was listening with the expression she wore when she was proud of something and trying not to let it show. Later, in the ballroom, dancing very slowly to something a string quartet was playing with careful and lovely restraint, Adrienne said into the curve of my ear, "You're not afraid anymore." "Not of the same things," I said. "What are you afraid of now?" I thought about it. "Wasting this," I said. Not losing it, but wasting it. Not being present enough to notice how good it is." Her arm tightened slightly around me. "I'll remind you," she said, "if you forget." "You'd do that?" "I'll do that," she said. "I'm very good at precision. I'll point it out precisely and repeatedly." I laughed against her shoulder and felt her laugh too, the rare, real kind, and the ballroom moved around us with its amber light and its cream roses, and its chandelier and all the beautiful, worked-for, honestly earned things. I had spent 2 years buying love with labor and calling it partnership. I had spent months relearning the difference between useful and worthy, between earning presence and simply having the right to occupy space. I had learned it in a half-finished ballroom with charcoal on my hands, in a winter garden with bare rose canes against glass, in the specific and undemonstrative kindness of someone who removed uncomfortable shoes and stood by the window so you didn't feel watched while you fell apart. And now I was here, in the room I had built, held by someone who loved me not because I was indispensable but because I was myself, because I was the person who thought about light at 45 degrees and argued about material weights and sat on marble steps in silk and refused eventually to make myself small anymore. Love, I had learned, is not something you purchase. It is not something you earn through sacrifice or justify through usefulness. It is something that finds you when you finally stop filling every room with your service and leave a little space for someone to see you standing there. The ballroom glittered. Adrienne's hand was warm and certain at my back. Somewhere in the winter garden below, the roses were blooming in the dark.